Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your hosts, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense.
Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino, and I am here with Joe LaVacca. No adjectives for you today, Joe. Just
no adjectives
maybe...
because I'm going to interject here. You deserve the adjectives, Joe, because we are on the eve of a very special day. It's Joe Gambino's birthday.
Yes,
so
that's right.
Happy birthday, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this with me for the last 6 months. Of course. You know, I do have a hack on how I remember. I think I've told you this. You share the same birthday as my dad. So
well, that makes it easier.
By just linking the two, who's also named Joe, I know I have two Joes on November 9th to not mess up, not forget to wish happy birthday. But listeners, if you're out there, drop Joe a little DM or a little happy birthday comment this week. He'll really appreciate it. And it's always good for the social media algorithm. So you're helping a lot of different things, right? So happy birthday, my friend. What's going on? Do you have plans?
We do. We're going to actually do a little drive shack golf sesh with some friends.
Very cool.
So that'll be fun. Yes.
What are the kiddies going to be doing?
What are the what? The kids are coming with us.
The kids are coming with us. It's a full family event. Very nice.
Our friends have kids, and it's just going to be, two of them will move, and Olivia will move. But last time she got to hit some golf balls too, so that was kind of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome. And I see that her form and her technique is getting much better in the garage gym workouts as well.
Yes. Yeah. She's picked up 2 3-pound weights, one in each hand, and was just like curling them and trying to press them. I was like, damn.
Yeah.
She's getting after it.
No. Every now and then.
I'm just watching toes because she just drops them on the floor after.
Dude, that's the exact, like, Avery occasionally still will walk over, just grab a kettlebell and be like, ugh. And I'm like, well, it's pretty good. I mean, considering that's probably your body weight for the most part, right? And I'm just like, I'm going to let you do this. I'm not worried you're going to hurt yourself, but I am worried about those little toes. And I'm really worried about my floor because I rent this place. So we can't be damaging floors, maybe one. And then 1B is we can't be breaking toes. Yeah. At least on Daddy's watch.
Yes. No, that would be that'd be rough. So I'd always tell her, like, listen, if you're gonna lift those weights, just make sure you watch those toes, because that's I'm giving you the lesson before you have to learn to stick. Because I've been there, I've done that, and I already know that you shouldn't do that.
Oh man, I dropped. I was talking to a client. I was unracking, one side of the bar as they were unracking the other side. And we had a plate on the bar and then forgot I put a 2.5 pounder on there. So all I did was grab the 45 pound and pull toward me. And then I just felt this excruciating pain on my big toe and looked down. There was the 2.5 pound plate that just landed perfectly right on top of it. And that toe turned black. This was over, I think, the summer. That toe turned black about 24 hours later, and it was not a pleasant week and a half, I'll tell you that.
Definitely not. That and catching your thumb when you're putting a dumbbell back on the rack.
Yeah,
there's the two worst.
Yeah, did that this past week as well. Nice little blood blister. And of course, when I get those, right, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go home and stick a pin in this thing, and that's going to give me a massive infection, I'm sure, one day. So, is there something
that's why
gratifying
you have to heat
about
it up first, Joe?
Yeah, I know. I always think about that, but you know what the problem is? I guess this is a solvable problem now that I'm saying this out loud, because I do have a lighter and I could, always heat up the tip a little bit. But my oven over here is one of those infrared type things. So
I see.
I don't know if I could just hold it.
We had one in the last apartment we were in, and was not a fan. I much prefer gas.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think gas is a lot more even. But, it depends on your stance, like a lot of things this past week.
Very true.
What do you like? What do you not like?
I did grow up on gas stoves my whole life, so that's probably it. Yeah.
So did I. So did I. All right. Well, I want to just make sure we said happy birthday.
Appreciate
you can finish your intro. I'm really excited to hear about your birthday weekend next week. But yeah, we could fill in the gaps of the Instagram and the YouTube, and I'll let you do your thing.
As Joe's alluded to, you can find us both on Instagram at Joe Gambino DPT for myself, at Strength and Motion _PT for LaVacca over there. This podcast is also on Instagram at Beyond Pain Podcast, and it is on YouTube, Cups of Joe _PT. So if you do want to watch these episodes and see Joe's handsome face and my dad's stash, you are more than welcome to hop on there and pop a view. Anyway, Joe, how are you? And this was all about me. How was your weekend? Or what do you got going on this weekend? Maybe since we're Friday.
Yeah. Well, we'll look ahead rather than looking back, because we did not link last week. Our schedules did not align.
We were recovering, Joe.
We were recovering a little bit. I will say this. I'm going to leave this just open-ended. But Halloween got a little out of hand for me. And it was very surprising. That's all I'm going to say. It was just like a very surprising night. We went out early. We ended early, but it was a lot more aggressive than I thought it was going to be. And I guess that's what happens with live music and karaoke. I just sort of get like...
Oh, you and karaoke, that will...
I just get...
that's...
carried away. Away.
I was more referring to our Yankees having a really rough loss, and I just needed some... Yeah. But
moment of silence.
I'm glad you had some fun, Joe. You and karaoke, that is we should just have a recording of you doing that and just leave it on the YouTube channel for entertainment value.
Well, the next time maybe you and I can't align, we'll do maybe we could just talk about doing like mini episodes by ourselves. Like, hey, can you steal 5 or 10 minutes, just record some thoughts? I'll steal 5 or 10 minutes. We can put them together. But my 5 or 10 minutes will just be me singing karaoke for everyone.
Just next time you're at the bar and there's karaoke and you're getting up there, just have Cord record you, and we'll just upload it for everyone's entertainment.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Love it. No, but in the week ahead, as I mentioned, my dad's birthday is tomorrow as well. My mom's birthday is November 14th. So I'm going to have everybody over to the apartment. We're going to do a nice brunch spread for everyone. So my sister, my brother-in-law, my niece, nephew, everybody will be here. And it'll be a nice change of pace for me, because now I don't have to drive all the way to Connecticut. I'm actually forcing them to come down to New York.
That's
right?
Nice.
I'm just pulling them into the clutches because there's just so much traffic I can handle. And being that we're at the year end, I sort of hit my quota on traffic tolerance. So we are going to start divvying it up a little bit more, I think, or that's my hope.
That is sounds like a very busy November for you. And on that note, I actually have my traffic quota has nowhere near been met since I've moved. It's been very nice. I was in one. There was a motorcycle accident that ended up closing down a bunch of roads, and I was in a ton of traffic. And to go a mile and a half, it took me almost 50 minutes, I think. And I was like, man, this is it's like getting on the George Washington Bridge. It's like,
yeah.
So that was my fix. It made me feel like I was back home for a second.
Right. I love it.
But let's get into it. Let's get into it. So we have, you had some questions that you wanted to ask. Yes. I'm actually excited to talk about it because I do think that this is actually something that a lot of people struggle with. I think people either go too hard or they go not hard enough in the gym. There's very few people that find this balance point in the middle. So I think the questions really stem more so around how hard should you train in general with your fitness, and also the themes around pain. So why don't you ask the questions and then we'll riff?
Yeah. So like you said, it comes up weekly, probably daily, especially when we have new clients and we're trying to engage in fitness and rehab programs. But the thought I had, that was a consistent theme, and I figured I'd bring it up to you, is how do you help gauge intensity or correct dosage with clients? So we're going to leave kind of pain out of the discussion for a second. But someone comes to us, I want to get stronger, I want to get bigger, faster, whatever. I mean, how are we best guiding them in those decisions?
Yep. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of RPE scale, right? So, using that, maybe in the show notes, I'll try to get a little diagram or some sort of breakdown of it. But in essence, right, I want people to be, depending on what we're doing, anywhere between 6s and, I can go up to 10. So for clarity, for people, RP of 10 is that's like the last, you can only, if you have to do 10 reps, by the 10th rep, that is the absolute last rep you can do before there's some sort of failure that happens, either technical or you just can't lift it anymore. That would be a 10 out of 10. Intensity level 9, you have kind of like 1, maybe 2 reps in the tank. And 8 would be 2, maybe 3 reps in the tank. 7 would be, 3 or 4, and so on and so forth. So I think I like it because it, sometimes people have more energy. Sometimes people feel like shit. So it kind of helps, like even it all out. With that being said, though, sometimes RPE scales don't, you have to have some sort of experience with lifting and lifting heavy, right? If you've never actually gone to failure before or lifted, like a 1 rep max, you're not really going to know what heavy is. And a lot of times when I'm training someone, especially for the first time, I hand someone like a 35-pound weight to do a goblet squat, and they're like, oh my God, that's so heavy. And then they do it and they do 10 reps. I'm like, well, it looks like you could have done like 55 more, So, what I end up doing that is like, so I'll start people off, we'll have RPs. But then as like people have some experience in the system, I actually really like, I don't know if you've ever used the 5-3-1 strength cycle. Have you ever used that program before?
Well, I think I know what you're talking about, but no, please elaborate. Maybe I haven't referred to it in that way.
I love using this because it's pretty much what you do is you take like either 90 or 95% of the person's projected 1 rep max. And then it's like, you shift, you have reps of 5, reps of 3, days where it's a 5-3-1, and there's a deload week. And then on all of those days, that last set 3, so say like, week 1, it's 3 sets of 5. The last one is 5 plus. So really you just do as many reps as possible until failure. Then you have 3-3-3, 3 plus on the last set, you do 3 plus. So you do pretty much as many to failure. And then the last one, 5-3-1, that one is a plus, you do as many reps until failure. And what people find out is like, it's adjusted off of like, okay, well, based on the weights that you've been doing, I'm going to calculate this as like, this is your 1 RM. We're going to just come off that a little bit so that we're really going to give you some wiggle room. And I have like a couple people on it right now who have been like, part of our journey has been like, how do we get them to load heavier? And now we're on it. They're like crazy, like personal best happening, because like now I just take this and like this person was kind of like, okay, like I just topped this weight and now it's only like maybe like a 10-pound difference, and he did like 15 reps. That's awesome. Before we were doing like 5 or 8 reps at like whatever rate. So now it's starting to teach them like, oh, I can go above. And now we go back to RPE scale, their RPE scales are going to be redefined. So there are like some ways you can play and teach people, like, or I'll just say, okay, for this particular set, let's just go to failure. Like, it's like, you're just going to perform reps for 60 seconds, find a weight that's going to bring you to failure. And now you start to like failure is another thing that you have to like learn. Like, I'm doing Grayson's ISM program, and they do a lot of stuff to failure. And it took me a couple of months to even like remotely get close to true failure, because like you start to get like the fatigue, and you have to like almost learn how to like fight through the fatigue sometimes. Like, so failure is also another skill. And then that starts to change your RP scale. So I think there are little tips that you can do, but I think in general, when we're talking about strength training, you don't have to go to failure. You don't really have to do that stuff a whole lot. You can stick to RPs of 7, 8s, and 9s for multiple sets and do pretty well from a strength perspective. But you actually, if you're using an RPE scale, it has to be as true to nature as possible. So I think you can use some of those other things to really teach what real intensity looks like, and then use the RPE scale to back off. But also, if they're new to training, you're probably not going to throw them into do max reps at this. So there's, some learning to that as you go along.
Yeah, I like that 5-3-1 thing. I think I know what a lot of people are going to be getting come January. I never like to. I know we just started a new block. I was pushing people a little bit more towards hypertrophy this block, just because I figured holidays were coming. It's nice to get a couple more sets of things, maybe burn a few more calories in the process. But then 5-3-1s, if you're training with strength and motion, watch out January. I like that. Now, will you keep them in a 5-3-1? You said this weekly, right? So 3x5, 3x3, 3x1, right? are you letting them do the same exercises, let's say on a 2 or 3 day split, like if they're focusing on one thing, or is it like a barbell bench press on Monday, a dumbbell bench press Wednesday, and then a push-ups on Friday or something like that? Or what do you do?
Yeah, I mainly put them around the major strength driving movements. So either the big three, squat, bench, deadlift, or if like someone's not benching and you're chest pressing with dumbbells, right, then you just supplement it for the dumbbell or whatever variation that you're using. So that's kind of how it's broken up. And then the accessory work, I don't use the 5-3-1-4. Then it's just like, okay,
Right.
we're going to do for 8, or maybe we're going to do to failure, or maybe we're going to do for whatever, if it's hypertrophy, right? Those rep ranges. So it just depends on whatever the rest of the goal of that program is. Usually it's just like a typical strength block. So the accessory work will probably have a little bit higher rep ranges than that. But again, right, trying to hit those like RPs of 7, 8s, and 9s. I don't use percentages too often, but sometimes I find them valuable just because it will, you kind of force people to have to push a little bit when you're using 90% of someone's, 1RM, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that. And I really think what you said was important, because anchoring, like understanding what an effort looks like or feels like for so many people, is really important. And I think where the effort system sort of maybe needs a little massaging for some people is that there can be these emotional loads and there can be physical loads.
Mm-hmm.
So again, still not talking about pain, but people are apprehensive, people are worried, people maybe have just been sedentary for a really long time. So just the idea, like you said, oh my God, like holding a 35-pound, dumbbell or kettlebell just to do a goblet squat. And oh my God, like the emotional load of just holding that and going through it, and each rep, like kind of having it unknown. So I love the idea of the anchors, but I also like would add on top of that of like, hey, there's physical, there's emotional, and then let's break it down after those 10 reps, because I don't use heart rate enough in clinic. It's something that I try to teach people a little bit of when they're away from the clinic. And maybe that's an opportunity for me and clients in the coming weeks and months to take advantage of their Apple Watch, or maybe just buy like a nice cheap heart monitor for the clinic. But the thing about the objectivity, after they can maybe move past some of that emotional component and emotional load, is you did 10 with the 35-pound goblet squat. That was great. What did you think? Tell me what you did well. And then a lot of people are like, well, I thought it was going to be painful. It wasn't. Okay, good. Here's what, I'm looking for now to know that you're probably safe to go even heavier. It didn't look like you got out of breath. It didn't look like you slowed down at all. You were kind of talking to me between the reps. So it still implied a lot of safety. So why don't we take this now 40 or 45-pound dumbbell, and I want you to just kind of focus on it again, hit in another 10. All right. And I found that when they anchor themselves, and then there's a little bit more of that positive feedback from me on, well, hey, how do you know I can do another 10 pounds? Here's why, right? You didn't get out of breath. You didn't do this. You didn't start busting a sweat. So a lot of times when people are going for as much as they can, or as many as they can, right, that barrier, I've almost started to shift it a little bit to, hey, I want you to go until you feel out of breath, right? Get that huff and puff. And then once you get the huff and puff, then we'll put it down, and then we'll sort of see what your recovery is like, right? And it's sort of a little bit of a blend. And I love this 5-3-1. And I'm sure you're familiar with the talk tests with people, right?
I am, yeah. I use it with like zone 2 work.
Yeah, perfect. So I was actually using it just yesterday, because I was out for a run and I was talking to Courtney. And then every time I was talking to her and we were talking about some different things, I get a little bit emotional about certain things going on in my life. And then I was like, okay, I feel like I can't complete a complete sentence. Let me start walking for a little bit. And then when I recovered, we're talking. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go for a run again. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Right. But when they get all huffy and puffy, if they drop that weight and then they're able to just like, carry out a conversation, they're like, yeah, wow, I can actually feel that. Okay, cool. Like to me, then you're probably going to be working at like that 6 or 7, rep range, right? If they put it down and they're really out of breath and they can only speak like one sentence, I'm like, wow, that was tough. I didn't think I could do that. And then there's always like those pauses, right? now I think I'm kind of probably going to like those 8s or 9s. And then if they're like completely like, and I've had this happen before too, like people need to sit down, people get lightheaded, and I'm like, wow, okay, that was pretty close to a max effort. So that's how I've kind of been anchoring it. And I know it's probably better suited, and I will say this, it's probably better suited for aerobic work. But have you ever used the talk test for strength work or power work or things like that?
I haven't really for that stuff, just because if we're talking about like pure strength here, like for me personally, like if I'm squatting and it's heavy, I'm out of breath afterwards, like all the time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't it doesn't mean that it's a 9 for me, right? It could be a 7. I'm like, oh my God, like squats suck, But then if I'm like benching or deadlifting, I'm like, maybe if I'm like deadlifting, if I'm like really pushing like an RP of 9, I'll be like, okay, like I feel a little winded afterwards. But like bench press, not really. Lunging, unless I'm doing high reps, not really. So it depends on like rep schemes and things like that drive heart rate. I don't think it's a bad thing to look at, but I think when we're looking at it, it's like intensity is intensity, and it should feel like if you're doing a 9, that if you even considered doing one more rep, you'd be like fighting for your life. Like
Right.
That's the kind of feeling that you want to get, and it's a skill to get there, which is why I like to find ways to layer on. How can we teach you that maybe what you think you're doing as an 8 may not really be an 8, it might actually be a 7. And then we do that by like, well, let's go to failure, or let's like really, really, really push it. Like I had somebody, he was doing trap bar deadlift the entire time.
One of
And
my
then
favorites.
I don't know if his gym doesn't have a trap bar anymore. But
Crazy.
he had to
It's
use
not a gym then. It's not a gym.
Yeah, he had to use a barbell. And I had programmed in the 5-3-1 program for the trap bar. So he had to use a barbell. And when he told me, he's like, oh, I didn't have the barbell. I didn't have the trap bar. I used the barbell. I felt a little bit in my back, so I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. His technique looked pretty good. So I think it's just a new variation for him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, did you actually hit the numbers? And he's like, yeah, I hit all the numbers. I was like, that's fucking awesome. I would have expected it to be, you would have missed them, because I was calculating your trap bar, and that's going to be, you can lift more on a trap bar than with the barbell. So I was very happy with that. And again, right, probably showing that what he's been doing has been heavy for him, right? I'm not going to take that away from him, but probably could have been pushing a little bit more, right? So you started to learn, like, people like that where, I'm not, it sounds like they're working hard, but I can always, like, even in a remote environment, I can kind of start to tell if somebody's really not pushing hard enough. I think, just experience of seeing like how people have progressed over time and how much load people can normally push. And like, it's not really unrealistic for someone to like deadlift one times their body weight. Like that's like a pretty easy benchmark for people to get. If they're struggling to get there and they're saying like, oh my God, this is really heavy, I'm starting to think like, it's heavy, right? But it's probably not like heavy. So, we can try to tweak those intensity levels. And I think that's really one thing that's missed for people who like struggle seeing progress in the gym, is they're probably not like not working, but you're also not working hard. And like, you need to work to a certain degree to actually get your body to change, right? Like, we're trying to create physical adaptation. So if it's like hard, but somewhat comfortable, it's not going to be enough to really stimulate change for you.
Right. And maybe that's a nice segue, because the second question I had for you was a little bit more around like, how much do you let people push past discomfort? And we've talked about pain guidelines and, keeping things at a 4 and then monitoring for this and monitoring for that. What you just said, though, made me think about trained versus untrained people. When someone comes in with pain and they're already trained, having this like margin for error is like a lot wider, because they get it. They know how to work hard already. A lot of people, though, in persistent pain or maybe stuck in pain, and they haven't, they know they shouldn't be sedentary, kind of air quotes. They know that they need to do this or they need to do that. A lot of them will tell me, well, I pushed it too hard. I wanted to do more. Or when we're in the gym, sort of trying to find a good rep range with a talk test or an RPE scale, I think I could handle a little bit more. It was a 4 out of 10. It was this, it was that. I'm really good at tolerating pain, right? A lot of these people would say. So I can do more. And I almost don't want them to do more because, to your point, when you have a lot of these people and we're programming for them, they can be working probably at 30% or 40% of their 1 rep max and still see gains in strength and function. They could be, 90 and 95% of their 1 rep max and definitely see gains in their strength and function. So with this whole large scale where people can do less and yield maybe just as good benefits in the long term, I'm saying, right? We're maybe stacking things up side by side in 4 weeks, maybe intensity really matters. But you and me are usually after lifestyle change, behavior change. So how much would you let, and let's maybe put it to like an untrained person, someone who comes in, says to you, I'm good at tolerating pain. I really am great with it. I can push through this, or I can do this, I can do this. Do you let them do that? And when do you pull them back?
So in like the specific case, if you're talking about somebody who has pain, they've been in pain for a while. Now, if they're untrained and they're not in the gym, that's going to be, maybe it's going to be a little bit different of a conversation. But I'll go back to like your original point, and then I'll go to untrained. You were talking about someone who like been in the gym, they know how to load, but they've been in pain for a while. Those are the people where probably most likely load modification is going to be what they need. Typically, someone who like, I have a good pain tolerance, and you're telling me, I'm starting to feel a 4 out of 10 pain when I'm at like 50% of my max, and I know I can do more. So then they do more because they want to get the feeling of training and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden now their pain gets too high, and now you're in this like little loop of setting things off and then having to rest, recover, and setting things off. So if it's the case of we're going above those things to try to get a training effect, and that is leading to pain not coming down but staying either the same or potentially getting worse, then you can't really go and use, you can't go above the pain guidelines, in my opinion. I also had somebody who had this like chronic shoulder issue, and he would only have like 1s and 2s with stuff, and that's within the pain guidelines. But his pain was getting either the same or a little bit worse with consistent loading. So even with 1s and 2s, we had to like take out all the irritating factors and really work on things to get him over the hump, and then put those things back in. So the pain guidelines are not perfect. They're good guidelines, but there are cases where if things are irritated and persistently irritated, you're probably going to need to modify load. And what I find with people who are active and struggle and kind of really push, even though there's pain, they need modifications. They need to reduce how much pain that they're feeling with their sessions. They need a lot of that environment to bring down their pain response. So in those cases, I'm probably going to always be under the pain guidelines. Now, someone who's untrained, and they're just people who I feel like, I'm not trying to take away from their pain, but I don't know if they have a really good understanding of what their pain scales are really like. They might tell me it's like a 6, but then everything else that I'm hearing from them tells me that it's really not a 6. Like it's a 6 to them. I'm not going to take that away. But to me, from what I'm hearing, like I have a client that I'm working with, and she was telling like she had like all this like pain and stuff, and she felt tight on certain days, but they were always around days that she trained harder, and it sounded a lot more like muscle soreness, and like like you're really sore, like you feel tight, and like sometimes even with my back, if I'm like if I make my hamstrings really sore, like I feel my back, like just because of the way I like that, all that's tied together. So I was kind of like guessing that was a little bit of that. So like in those cases, I'll be like, okay, well maybe we can try 5 or 6 and see what happens, right? Like what happens afterwards. So then there's some experimenting that you can do. And then really I look at what happens 24 to 48 hours afterwards in those cases. So if there's someone where I'm like, well, maybe in this case, it might make sense for us to play with 5s and 6s, because when they're done with the session, they're back to normal, or they feel a little bit better or something like that. Then the pain guidelines, like you can almost push them a little bit more, because either A, that pain response is not really a true 5 or 6, or maybe it truly is, but they're feeling better afterwards. So that pain is really not a threat to their system, because there's a clear effect coming after that calms the system down overall. So then we can push past that. So that's probably the times where I'm sticking to flexibility with the pain guidelines. Sometimes you need to just not even use them at all. Sometimes pain needs to be avoided to kind of create progress. And then sometimes you really need to stick to them, because if someone's pushing hard and they're just going above it, they're always 4s and 5s or whatever they're doing seems to be an irritator, then you just have to kind of listen to the body a little bit more and make some changing, even if they're not 100% happy with it. And that's where you have to find modifications that they can push and use higher RPs to have some enjoyment with training. Sometimes that's harder to do.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think just as a final point, just so I can share a little bit too, because I don't want to just throw questions out at you without giving you my opinion. I think when I look at each individual person, you sort of get a read on them. I think with more of the trained people, when they say, well, I could do more, my question to them is, well, why? What's the point? Well, I don't want to, lose my this or lose my that. And I would say, okay, but you tried this already. That's why we're having this conversation. So if you're already at a 50% of your 1 rep max and you're feeling some discomfort, well, what's the goal of this exercise? It's, for posterior strength. So could we superset it with something else that's non-irritable rather than just, keeping your deadlift as a, single exercise by itself for the long recovery? Right now, we're taking that exercise, we're cutting the intensity in half. So you shouldn't need as much recovery period. You should have a little bit more in the tank for something else. So maybe it becomes a superset. Why don't we try that? The other thing that I sort of would then say to them is, well, you were doing maybe a 3x5 program or a 3x3 or, wherever you were with your gym or coach. Now we're at 50%. So what if we move to a 5x10 or a 5x12 type program, right? And then make up for some of the intensity with an increase in volume. Why can't we try that? But then at one point or another, with a lot of the trained individuals, I kind of get a sense that they're going to do it anyway. They're going to push it because I gave them a little bit of that pain talk. I, was kind of inferring that hurt's not harm during the session. I'm kind of inferring a few things that pain is a learned response, it's a conditioned response, things like that. And I know that they'll just go out and they're going to try to push it. And I tell them off the bat, if you're going to do that, just be ready to accept the outcomes. So what's going to be a good outcome? What's going to be a bad outcome? If you couldn't deal or couldn't cope with your 5 or 6 or 7 out of 10 pain, but now you've had this little pain education seminar in our session, and you're like, well, okay, maybe I can reprocess that 5, 6, or 7, and I can get up and go for a walk afterwards when I wake up and I'm sore the next day. And I will go to the gym if you're telling me I'm safe. And okay, right? And like you said, pain guidelines aren't perfect. And people do have a little bit of a misconception on how high pain is or how it isn't. To just take that one step to the untrained person, and they're like, well, I feel like I can do more, but it's a 4. I usually am like, well, hey, here's the good news. You don't have to, right? Because based on the strength data I've seen, we can be at 40% of your 1 rep max. We can be at 95% of your 1 rep max. You haven't done this movement in a really long time, or maybe this movement's new for you. So because you're brand new, you don't really have to work that hard. Isn't that amazing? So I almost kind of would flip that story for the untrained person, knowing that, hey, I know you're going to get benefit if you just keep showing up for 8 weeks or 12 weeks. And whatever base you have, we're going to build, as opposed to being here, with our trade people and then worried about them kind of slipping back. So I think that's where I would maybe add a little bit of context, but I totally agree with you. And I really appreciate you answering my questions today, Joe. Thanks.
No, of course, no problem. And I like what you just said there. I mean, it's pain. If they feel confident and they can do it, and sure, pain pops up here and there, right? Like that's expected in someone's journey. But if they're continuing to get better and they're loading, it doesn't matter if they're a 4 or if they're a 5 or they're 3 level pain. That's a moot point. It's more of like when you really have that person and they're kind of pushing it, but then there's like a clear nothing's getting better, then something needs to change, right? Like, and those are the harder conversations to have. And I think people also need to and I dealt with this for a long time on my back, where we have our experiences in the gym. We know what's kind of heavy to us, what's not heavy to us. We have a little bit of ego to it, right?
Yeah, sure.
So when you're going back into it, like when I was deadlifted 350, I'm like, well, 275, right, really isn't heavy for me. So as I'm kind of going back into my training, yeah, exactly, right? So when I'm going back into training, I'm like, okay, let me start at 225. That's my starting point. It was never 135. It was never 185, right? Like those were warm-up sets. And my first set starts at 225. If I tolerated it, I go to 250. If I tolerated it, I go to 275. And then every time I get to 275, my back hurts. Because I never listened to my body, right? And just kind of went back to my old thinking habits. And if I would have just maybe like 250 was fine. Well, what happens if I would have trained at 250 for a while, right?
Right.
I may not have been in so much pain for so long, right? And been able to navigate things a little bit better. So people need to also like have a little bit of flexibility. And I've been finding myself having the conversation about flexibility with your programming, with the time you have dedicated to it. Like if you are always in it, like it has to be perfect, it has to be this intense, it has to be this or that. When it comes to times when you can't do that, it becomes very disappointing. And that's the number one reason why I find people to fall off. I mean, there's certain people who never miss because that's just part of them. Like,
yeah, sure.
You know, I mean, I've had times where I didn't really train that much, but it's like, honestly, for me, it's like a lifestyle. I love it. I enjoy doing it. It's very rare unless there was something that really kind of pulls me away from it. But there are people, and I had a conversation with someone yesterday where the conversation was around like, oh, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'm going to be consistent. And that's kind of been a theme for them in the past. Well, yeah, you know, and she was thinking like, I need to, you know, wait till I come back from my trip because I need to have all my energy to it. I need to do this and that. But she also had like a billion things on her plate. You know, she's like studying for an MCAT and she works in a lab and she has her thesis coming up and there's like a billion things going on. I'm like, well, if you're trying to wait for perfect, you're probably going to fall off regardless. So figure out, you know, like you really need to have a little bit of leniency here and figure out where can you get your small wins now? Because then when you start to feel better and you have a bunch of small wins, well, then getting in the gym becomes easier, right? It's very hard when you have all this stuff going on. Then every time you go in the gym, you have a flare up, right? So people need to get away from this idea of like, I need to be in the gym 5 days a week for 1 hour and it needs to look like X, Y, and Z because sure, maybe you've had success like that in the past, but you can have success in a billion other ways. And the more you can kind of get away from like, it needs to look like this or it's like nothing, the better it is going to be for you mentally, for your consistency, for your progress and things like that.
Right. All right, man. I love it. That's a great closing remark. You got anything else?
I'm sure I do, but you can take us home.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you've made it this far, we love you. Joe, I love you and happy birthday, my friend.
Thank you.
Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Beyond Pain podcast.